I like to think of myself as something of a road warrior. Having lived in Nebraska and Utah as an adult, but with families in Washington and Arizona, my family has clocked a lot of miles. And I think the road trip is a common feature for a lot of Westerners' lives. If you can stomach the potentially incessant cries of, "Are we there yet?" the region has endless landscapes that reply, "Yes, you're here already." Before reaching your final destination, there are innumerable places along the way that shouldn't be ignored. Welcome to Writing Westward. I'm your host, Brendan Rensink. This month we speak with author Neil Mathison about his new book, Airstream Country, a geologic journey across the American West. In narrating his exploits pulling a trailer around the West, Mathison points us to the geology we are passing by and helps us not miss out on the stories it's telling. For new listeners, here's a brief introduction to the podcast and myself. Writing Westward is a monthly podcast featuring conversations with historians, journalists, scientists, and scholars from various disciplines who are writing about the North American West. The goal of these exchanges is to spark your curiosity to think more deeply about the region, its lands and environments, and the histories and experiences of the peoples who have called it home. Writing Westward is supported by the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University, where I, Brendan Rensink, serve as Associate Director and I'm a Professor of History. For better or worse, this is a one-man operation. I am the host, producer, sound engineer, publicist, and everything else, all roles for which I have zero training. But I am passionate about the North American West, and I'll take any excuse to read more and talk to interesting people who are writing about the region. If a guest intrigues you, you can find links to their work in the show notes or at writingwestward.org. If you have a moment, please subscribe and leave reviews wherever you get your podcasts. Share links with friends and follow us on Facebook, Blue Sky, or X, Twitter, and send in some feedback. At the end of the episode, I will include some more information about my own scholarship and the Redd Center, our programming and projects, and funding opportunities that you could apply for. That's right, we may want to give you money. And with that, let me introduce who we are talking to this month and why. Neil Mathison is a retired naval officer, nuclear engineer, and corporate businessman, turned essayist and author. His writings have appeared in a wide range of literary outlets, including the Kenyon Review, North American Review, Blue Mesa Review, and many, many others. Many of his essays have won awards, and a number have been included in prominent anthologies. He's the author of two books. The first, Volcano, an A to Z, and other essays about geology, geography, and geotravel in the American West, was published by Bauhan Publishing in 2017 and received multiple awards and honors. His second book, which we discussed today, Airstream Country, A Geologic Journey Through the American West, was published by the University of New Mexico Press in 2025. In Airstream Country, Mathison covers geologic landscapes from across the American West, tying together stories of he and his wife's experiences pulling a Bambi Airstream trailer down endless miles of highway with the geology that they encountered. The writing is engaging and entertaining, and throughout invites the reader to recalibrate how they've thought about Western landscapes in the past, and hopefully pushes us to ask new questions about the geology we're seeing whizzing by on our many road trip adventures around the region. Neil Mathison, welcome to Writing Westward.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'll let listeners know we were just chatting a little bit beforehand about potential sounds that might disrupt our conversation, and you said that there might be ferry horns in the background.
That's true. In Friday Harbor, the ferries arrive probably every couple of hours or so, and we can hear them from our house. We're due east of where the ferry comes in. So,
well, I should have timed this interview to coincide with that because I would really love to hear those ferries in the background. So today we're talking about this great little book you wrote, Airstream Country, which is about geology and about the West, but also about kind of road tripping, driving around the region. So I thought maybe we could structure our conversation first talking a little bit about road trips in the West, and then we could pivot and talk about some different regions that you write about and a little bit about their geology and what people maybe should be looking for if they're out traveling about. What is your personal history with the West as a region?
well, I grew up in the West, and they I mean, we came to Seattle, my parents and I, in 1947 or 49, and been here ever since, except for my professional jobs, which have taken me out of the area. My father loved to travel, and he loved to travel towing a little camping trailer. And we visited everywhere in the West, up into Canada, down into Mexico. We were so early with the camping trailer that one time trying to get into Yosemite, the rangers thought we were gypsies. And in those days, they didn't want gypsies in the national park. Maybe today too, who knows? But we watched over the years as more and more people took up trailer travel, RV travel in the West. It was RV travel died when the Great Depression came, although it was thriving in the 20s. By the time World War II was over, it was reborn, and we were traveling in that era.
In your professional life, when you've left the West and come back, has that experience of being other places changed how you kind of view your home region?
Yeah. I went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, and I remember the first year there, plebe year, I could not stand the color change of the leaves, because in Washington State and Western Washington anyway, it was all conifers. It was green, and the red and yellow drove me nuts. And I did become very fond of that area and got used to it. But it was, I think there was always this moment when I came home, when you'd cross the border into Washington, especially coming up from California, and you would smell the conifers, and it was like, I'm home, and never lost that. I mean, we lived in Hong Kong, I lived in California, and each time I came back, and this is where I wanted to be.
Every time I go visit my parents in Washington, I mean, I remember that it's green. I know that it's green and lush, but even so, every time it still surprised me, like, man, it's even greener than I remember.
Yep, green in December when the rest of the country is browned out. So,
Yeah, right now here in Utah, we're in this kind of this shoulder season where the autumn leaves are done, mostly done. But actually, we should have a bunch of snow in the mountains, but it's coming a little late. But there's usually a few weeks where it's just all brown. Once the mountains have snow on them, then they're really beautiful.
yes.
And when the autumn leaves are going, they're beautiful. But this little in between section can be kind of rough.
Yeah, here we've just entered the big dark, but I
Yeah.
think the stormy part's starting next week.
Yeah, where it's dark by like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening. I know. So as we think about kind of Western tourism specifically, it requires a lot of driving,
Yes.
and a lot of the most interesting places that people come out west to see are often like they're out there, and you have to. I mean, even if you fly into a major city, like you're probably still going to have to drive a ways to get out to wherever these places are. I remember one time one of our professors here was hosting a group of foreign scholars, I think all from continental Europe, and they had, I think, 3 days, and they wanted to do a little road trip and visit around. They're like, "Yeah, so what order should we do these in for these 3 days? We wanna see Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon and Yosemite." I think we're like the 3 spots.
Yeah.
And their sense of scale coming from continental Europe, it was just so skewed, they didn't realize that, like, technically, I think you could drive those 3 places in a few days, but it wouldn't be much time to see anything.
Right.
So it's a big place. So in relation to that, as you have lived other places outside of kind of this big expansive West, have you done much road tripping, be it with a trailer or otherwise, like in other regions?
In the East, on the East Coast, yes.
How's that felt different?
Well, everything's close together, and even by European standards, of course, it's not that close together. We used to have a condo and a house in Sun Valley, and we could get over there in about 10 or 11 hours from Seattle. And I remember telling my East Coast friends, that's about the same distance as from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. And they were stunned that we would do that on a, Friday, ski Saturday and Sunday and drive home on Monday. So I think that scale of the West is something that doesn't really exist to the same extent back east. I mean, I would drive long distances because I was used to it in the West, but most Easterners don't. And of course, with the advent of cheap air travel, they don't have to. And I think that they lose something because you're not connecting one place to another, I think, when you fly by air.
Yeah, what is it that you see on a 10-hour drive? Because sometimes with flying, you have to be to the airport early and then there's maybe a layover. It
Mhm.
might end up taking 10 hours anyway to get to your location. But what jumps out to you to like maybe what you would say to those Eastern friends? Like, no, it's not a burden to have to drive the 10 hours because the drive is part of the experience. Like, what do
Right.
you like about that?
Well, I like feeling one thing leading to another. And I actually talk about this in the book about how this unfolding of the journey is very pleasing to me. I like seeing the weather change. I like seeing the enormous changes in geography that occur. I mean, it's almost impossible to go someplace in the West where you aren't seeing enormous changes in geography. And that's the joy of it. And I don't think the only thing that's close to it is trains. It's similar on a train, but of course in the West, those train routes are not anything close to what exists in Europe. You can't really see the train.
Yeah, like we live here in Utah and my wife's family is down in Arizona, and one time I was like, "Oh, maybe we should look into, like it'd be fun to go down by train instead of by car," and, like,
Yeah, good luck.
I think we'd have to go all the way to Los Angeles and then back across. There's not like a north-south line.
Right, right.
But yeah, but you're right, with trains, you can kind of look out the window and just watch the scenery change. I always find it interesting when we drive down to Arizona because, as you mentioned, like, so in a single day's travel you pass through so many wildly different geologic features, ecosystems, the types of plants and animals. Probably pass through 5 or 6 really unique areas,
Yep.
right?
And elevation, I mean, that is, and you can see it all. That's what's so cool about it. Back east, if you drive across the Appalachians into the Midwest, you have one place where things change. That's going through the Appalachians. But after that, it looks pretty much the same. Indiana looks like Illinois, and frankly, they look a lot like Pennsylvania. So out here, it's not like that. It's just, never tire of it.
Do you feel also that in other places in the US that specifically like the geology is not that it not specifically because topography is sometimes a little more muted, but is the geology less visible? Is it more buried under
Yeah.
topsoil? It's just less exposed?
Yep. It's older. And the older in the sense of its peak activity period was millions of years ago on the East Coast. Now, the geology is not a static thing. And of course, things change back there. They have earthquakes back there. But the mountains, the Appalachians, which used to be as high as the Himalaya mountains, aren't anymore, and they're a more modest, temperate type of thing. Where out here, we have volcanoes that really, by geological standards, aren't very old at all.
So you also write about kind of, again, just kind of trying to build up our context here for listeners, that you already mentioned that you grew up doing lots of road trips with your parents. You also write about how you and your family, and it's when you still had, especially when you still had a kid in the house, that you tried to road trip around quite a
Yeah.
bit. What did those kind of itineraries look with a teenager?
Well, the goal was to, first of all, he was a pretty good teenager and didn't appear to be sick of us because when you're cooped up in the car, you don't have a lot of room to get away. But the idea was to get him to the major national parks in the West, which was a gift that I had gotten from my parents. And And Susan my wife, had quite a bit of travel experience on the West Coast, not so much into the interior of the West, into the Rocky Mountains. So the plan was in June, we would try to break loose for a couple of weeks and travel. And during those years, I was starting my writing career. So I had the flexibility. Sometimes I would drive to Missoula, and Susan and our son John would meet me in Missoula, and then we would, continue from there. Or when we had the house in Sun Valley, we would use that as the base. And so the goal was get him to the major national parks. And we did. We hit all of the big ones in the West during those years.
And was it primarily tent camping along
Yeah.
the way?
Mm-hmm. We didn't have an RV in those days. We had a big SUV, and so we could carry bikes and all that kind of stuff. We did a lot of cycling too. We would always bring the bikes along, and so we, could use those to explore a place closer, which you can't always do with the car.
Did you find that the pacing of travel with a tent versus a trailer has altered the experience? Because the tents takes a lot of. I mean, RVs do take some setup and takedown, but not like a tent camp.
Absolutely. One of the reasons Susan and I had always thought, once she retires, we're going to buy an Airstream trailer, but what was happening was the first few years we didn't have it, and if it started to drizzle, we would check into a motel, and we decided, this really isn't the way we want to travel. A tent is still your thing, and a RV is also your thing. Hotels and motels aren't, and that was part of why we preferred to tent camp when the family was younger and RV now, because we like having our place.
Yeah.
Rather than always even though, one Best Western looks quite a bit like another, it's not your place. So,
And often they're not located, you're out on a Western road trip to see national parks and stuff. Sometimes there's not a lot of lodging in hotels close to where you might want to go. Or if there is, it's exorbitantly expensive.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to do the more out of the way national monuments. They don't have the accommodations that the older, bigger parks have. It's
Yeah.
it's just not the same. You're not out. The experience of being in the outdoors, whether you're towing a trailer or pitching a tent, is part of the joy of, being on the road, I think.
Do you do much boondocking where you're totally off grid, just on BLM land, pulling over wherever you find a flat
Well,
spot? Or
we don't actually. Part of it is our trailer is pretty small. It's only 16 feet, and so it's pretty. It's useful to have restrooms and things like that are features of campgrounds, and we are gifted in the West of these spectacular state parks and national parks with some of the facilities are better than you'll find in a hotel or a motel.
it's an embarrassment of riches, really.
Yep.
Some of the camping infrastructure we enjoy out here. Well, let's pivot a little bit to geology, because your book, it's about road tripping, it's about visiting places, but specifically with an eye for the natural world and for geology.
Mhm.
What's your background? Because you're not a geologist.
No, I was a nuclear engineer and a computer sales executive. Not geology, but geology was always part of my life. And we would go to Yellowstone, and the question that was always in my mind is, why is this here? And in the 50s and 60s, that wasn't articulated nearly as clearly as it is now when you visit the parks. So that question, a mountain range, why here and not someplace else? A desert, how come? Yeah, I mean, some of those things may seem obvious, but they really aren't always obvious. When John McPhee wrote his glorious series of essays in the New Yorker magazine, later put into books, about the plate tectonics revolution. I was at the time living in Hong Kong, and I thought, here's kind of a key of why the West is the way the West is. And a lot of what he wrote about was in the West. And I suppose that was the eye opener for me. I remember one time changing a job down in Silicon Valley, and I hired somebody to, dialogue with about what should I do next. McPhee was writing his books at this time, and I was fascinated with them and also thrilled to be able to get out and travel again, which you couldn't do as easily by car anyway in Asia. And I remember the person saying, well, you really should be a geologist. It sounds like that's what you're really interested in.
Yeah, your existing skill set didn't quite match with that,
No.
those career aspirations. What kind of resources? So, I mean, I'm not a geologist. I suspect that very few of our listeners are. But I always tell, I mean, we have lots of cool rocks and mountains and stuff. I hike around with my family a lot. And I'm always trying to push my son, like, you should become a geologist. I was like, rocks are, and we've done some rock hounding. I'm like, rocks are so cool. And if I had, I don't know, a middle school, because there was a middle school teacher who really turned me on to history and kind of put me on this path to become a historian. But it could have been a really cool geology class in middle school, and I could have been very happy, I think, in
Yeah.
that world. What kind of resources have you used then to learn that, like, people, regular Joes like us, who aren't already geologists, could use to be able to read the landscape better?
My main go-to source is a series of books called Roadside Geology. And they are organized by state in the West and by highway. And this was the outgrowth of really the interstate highway system, which started cutting through geology. And so all those layers were visible along the roads. And I use that as my main way of trying to interpret what I'm seeing. The other thing I would say, I mentioned John McPhee before, but plate tectonics opened the door to the kind of geology that I'm interested in, which is the big picture. I applaud and admire rockhounds. However, that microscopic view, essential to geology, is not where my interests lie. My interest is trying to figure out why one thing connects to another, and so roadside geology does that for me. And there's a book for for all the states in the West, and I carry them around with us when we travel.
And does one of you read in the passenger seat, read passages out loud as the other drives?
My mother used to do that, but Susan doesn't.
Sometimes when we're driving, I'll make my wife get on Wikipedia or something, and I'll see a sign. I was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Hey, all right, you got to do some Wikipedia narration for me," and she'll, read these entries, and as we learn along the way.
Yeah, my mother did the same thing. I loved it. And what I do is at the end of a journey, especially if it's a new route that I'm not that familiar with, I'll haul the book out and then recreate what I remember through what's written in the book. And because it's organized by the series is organized by highway, it's quite easy to do that.
And if you're traveling that highway in the backwards direction, you just read the chapters in reverse.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna check this book series out because we do a lot of driving, and maybe this is what'll get my son. Maybe this is how I can turn him into a geologist.
I have a butt stack of them to my right, adjacent to my TV up here, and because I use them when I'm writing, and I'll go back and review some road that I'd been on. They cover a lot of roads too. I mean, that's what's impressive about it. So it's not
some
just
small highways that you may not expect.
It's got the blue highways in there, and pretty cool.
Well, that's where some of the coolest stuff is as well, and less crowds. So that's always a plus for me. I don't think listeners probably want to listen to a conversation about geologic layers, the Entrada sandstone versus the, Kayenta formation, or I don't think that's what they're probably looking for, although I could talk about that all day. I wouldn't have anything to contribute, but I could listen to someone talk about it all day. But maybe we can talk through some of the regions that you write about and try to provide listeners kind of with a new set of lenses to wear, geologic lenses to wear, through which to view the West as they travel about and help them learn what kinds of questions to ask as
Yeah.
they're looking around, which is often when people talk to researchers or me as a historian, I'm like, no, I don't know everything about history, but I do know what questions to ask. And so that I can find answers. And I think I think your book in a lot of ways kind of might help train people as they're looking at landscape to know what kinds of things they should be asking about it, to do what you were kind of saying, like, so why does it look like this? And then why does it transition into this? And why is this mountain here? Why is that mountain there? This mountain range goes north south, but why do the Uintas in Utah go east west? Right?
Right.
There's answers for all of that, but you have to know what kind of questions to ask. So I thought maybe we could walk through a few regions,
Sure.
and maybe some locations or specific geologic features that have, really have struck you or have been exciting for you to then ask these kinds of questions about. I thought we'd start on the West Coast. You pepper West Coast especially Pacific Northwest coast locations throughout a few different chapters on the Cascades and the subduction zones and the Inland Peninsula and volcanoes and so forth. So how do you read plate tectonics or evidence of them kind of in the visible geology of the Pacific Northwest? And are there any specific places that you suspect people drive by regularly where there are geologic stories legible on the landscape, but people aren't thinking about them and they're just driving right past?
Yes. Well, of course, when you follow the coast highways, which is US 101, California 1, once you get down into Northern California, that's where plate tectonics is most visible. And one of the reasons the West Coast is so dramatic is because we've got the Pacific Plate diving under the North American Plate, and that's forcing mountains up. And so you don't have the same kind of lowland shore that you have back east, for example.
And the only places you kind of do are river deltas might fool you into kind of that kind of more low-lying shore region, but most of the coast, most of the coast is not like that.
Yeah, well, the Columbia River is a great example of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because the West Coast is rising due to the subduction of the plate, the Columbia has no delta. So the Nile has a delta, the Mississippi has a delta, the Danube has a delta, but the Columbia doesn't. It drops right off the edge of the trench that is off the coast. So
I've never thought about that. There is no river delta on the Columbia.
No delta. And in fact, really, Fraser River is probably the closest to a river that has a delta, but it's dumping into the Salish Sea, Puget Sound, and Georgia Strait. And so it's not dropping off the edge into the trenches that line the West Coast, the ocean coast.
Yeah, because off the Fraser, there's all these islands kind of between and the open ocean,
essentially, and it's not really that deep compared, and nor is it as tumultuous as the open West Coast, the Pacific Coast is.
So beside like this kind of steep coastlines and things, what are other features that when you look around, you can say, that's a product of the subduction zone that's happening volcanoes. Just off the coast? All right, the volcanoes.
And I grew up under these volcanoes, and in fact, my first book is basically, the title of it is, the volcano in A to Z, because I grew up under Mount Rainier, and spent much of my childhood hiking around the mountain. But there's a whole series of those guys, and they start up in Canada and they run all the way down into Northern California, and you see them, they're so dramatically visible.
It's some of the most prominent in terms of American mountains, these huge conical volcanoes in the Northwest. Like they're the most visually prominent I think, of any, really. Like Mount Rainier, it's just,
In the U.S., there's nothing else like it. I mean, part of the deal is Mount Rainier is 14,000 feet high, and you view it from sea level. There's some glorious mountains in the Rockies, but you're viewing them usually from 3,000 or 4,000 feet to 13,000. So it doesn't look. It has its own drama, and I like it very much, but it ain't a volcano. And also these volcanoes are alive. They are not quiescent. They aren't extinct. They are very active volcanoes. In the big picture, extremely active, and they compared to volcanic activity elsewhere in time.
have you found that changes your experience, driving around, being a tourist in the shadows? 'Cause I know, at least me as a kid, like Mount St. Helens loomed large
Yeah.
in my childhood, kind of just in mythology. It erupted, I think, a month before I was born, a couple months before I was born, and I remember we visited once. Maybe I was 8 or 9, and this was the time when that landscape had not started to kind of rebound and regrow. It was still just trees all lying in the same direction as far as the eye could see. And as a little kid, I was really nervous. It was very cool and it was exciting, but there was just this looming sense of dread or danger that really colored the experience for me as a little kid. Do you sense that as you, say, visit some of these beautiful volcanic mountains versus something in the Rockies?
Well, St. Helen, I was living in Seattle at the time St. Helens erupted. Actually, I was on my sailboat and I heard it. And then you could look south from where I was and you could start to see the clouds of ash.
And did you immediately know what was happening?
Because it had been sending warning signals.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think the thing that St. Helens was a wake-up call, that these volcanoes are not extinct. They can go at any time. And the evidence of it was all over the place, but I don't think we really noticed it. That if you were interested, Mount Lassen was a warning because it had erupted at the beginning of the 20th century. And we visited Mount Lassen with my father back then, So probably we're a little bit more aware than most people. Most people looked at those at Mount Rainier and Mount Baker and St. Helens and said, well, they're always going to be there. Not true. And they aren't always going to be there, or they'll be very different.
Yeah. I mean, St. Helens is still there, but it's no longer the mountain it was, right?
No, maybe again, though.
Yeah, yeah. Give it a few 100 million years, or who
Maybe
knows?
not even that. Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the interesting things about the West is Eastern Washington has this enormous geology of lava flows. And essentially it's the same phenomena that's under Yellowstone today that launched those things. But they erupted at very infrequent intervals. I mean, it was an enormous eruption of lava, but it only happened at 100,000-year intervals. The Cascade volcanoes, big one, of course, was the one that led to Crater Lake, Mount Mazama. That was only 6,000 or 7,000 years ago that thing blew up. The whole mountain went away. Crater Lake was left behind, and ash was spread all the way to Saskatchewan. So the Cascade volcanoes, product of subduction, are very young and very active, unlike that geological flow, those lava flows that, laid down across Western Washington and Oregon and Idaho and all the way to Yellowstone. This is a different, very lively volcanic scene here.
You write about how visiting Yellowstone as a kid, and you kind of already mentioned this, that there's these, hot pots and springs and geysers, and people understood that that's happening because of, heat from below the surface of the earth. But this kind of geologic explanation of this caldera and this hot spot of magma that
Mhm.
that the plates had been, traveling over the course of hundreds of millions of years. that wasn't really much of the discussion or how the park told the story compared to where it is today. And you point specifically to 1980 and Mount St. Helens as the shift in public awareness.
Yes. But of course, the science wasn't there. The So in the plate tectonics revolution began in World War II, partly because uh, they were mapping the ocean beds, and geologists at the time began to recognize, hey, there's a thing. We may have I call it a bumper car derby of plates bumping into each other. But that's one of the revolutions of 20th century science. And so it wasn't there. And it certainly wasn't broadly known. And in Yellowstone, they talked about, faults and heating due to the faults, but not why the faults were in that place and not someplace else. And so I actually think the park, one of the reasons the story wasn't told is that it simply wasn't understood well enough yet to tell. But now, it's kind of like DNA, I think. It's one of the revolutions of my lifetime anyway, that has changed our fundamental understanding of how the planet has developed.
And then, by 1980, the science was there. And because of St. Helens, people then started asking the questions about the science.
Yeah, it was
right?
blowing up on your TV screen. Whoa.
And I know, a few times a year, there's always some sensationalist headline that pops up about, Yellowstone and if it blows again, because it's super volcano. It could blow, and it will be devastating. But there's always some, fake news stories of wildlife seen fleeing Yellowstone. Maybe it's about to blow or something ridiculous like that.
Well, there's a reason why that is a very monitored place, and it will blow, and hopefully we'll get warning before. I mean, this goes on all the time now in Western Washington because each of the volcanoes occasionally rumbles about, and it shows up in the Seattle Times right away. So.
Yeah. Well, and in Seattle's always, they're waiting for the big one, which
we're not
apparently
in really good space.
Yeah, a little overdue from what I understand. Let's move inland a little bit. So if plate tectonics and subduction is what, built up these very young West Coast mountain ranges and volcanoes, it's still visibly, audibly rumbling at times. In the interior West, we have mountains that were also, the uplift was created by, plate tectonic forces, but they've now slowed down in their growth, and erosion is outpacing the slow uplift in a lot of these places, the Rockies. And you write about various places in the Colorado Rockies, Tetons, Wind Rivers.
So the Sierras are definitely being worn down. Their uplift, the technical term is orogeny, is kind of over. But the Rockies, that is not the case. The Rockies are still rising, and that orogeny is still going on. And I do think you can take several big ideas and watch where they play out in the West. So one of them is the Colorado Plateau, which is dramatic because it's relatively slow changing, very stable place. What that means is that the layers were left behind. They weren't eroded away. And so the Colorado Plateau is where you can be a detective of the continent's history going way back because it's still there. Now, it's not uniform, of course. There are chunks of history that are missing because they did erode away. But I think the paradox is all that spectacular canyon country, the Bryce, Zion, the Grand Canyon, they're the result of a stable geology, not a violent geology. The other big story, of course, is the continental ice sheet, and that's the band right along the Canadian border all the way through, well, it actually goes all the way across the country, but the part in the west goes from the coast to the Rocky Mountain summits That is a domain of ice. And the story is the last ice age, which is recent, only by geological standards anyway. It's only 12,000, 13,000 years ago. So the ice is the story of that part of the geology. When you go farther south, Nevada, down into Arizona, you have another phenomena, and that is part of why the Tetons, for example, are still a growing mountain range, and that is basin and range. This is tipping up mountain ranges, drawing down valleys, and that is I think the fourth large phenomena in the West that is shaping the West. So,
And the Tetons, I mean, the basin and range, that's Nevada, just these series of parallel mountain ridges and valleys.
yep.
As these landscapes tip. I didn't realize the Tetons are
Oh yeah,
also the same thing.
they are.
Thinking about glaciers and ice and how they, carve out the landscape. Do you have any favorite spots that you think best demonstrate the kind of the power of how glaciers can, really, shape the land?
Yeah. Well, there's two really. One of them is Mount Rainier, because those glaciers are active now. You can see them. You can see how it shaped the mountain. But the other one is the Columbia Basin in western Washington, Oregon, and chunks of Idaho, where the great Ice Age floods essentially carved out the geography of that part of the world. And they really the largest floods, glacial floods, that ever occurred on the planet. And so the Columbia River through downstream of Grand Coulee Dam is a lovely place where there are several giant coulees that were cut by those floods. And that's about the Ice Age. Missoula, of course, was, underneath a lake as big as Lake Superior, that emptied a dozen times during the Ice Age.
Well, and here in Utah, we were under Lake Bonneville.
That's right.
Which emptied quite dramatically. There's I don't know who it is, but there's a faculty member here on campus that has a bumper sticker that says "Refill Lake Bonneville," and I need to look up the story. It's just a funny thought, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be happening anytime soon.
No.
Do you have places like in the Colorado Rockies where not necessarily from ice and glaciers, but where you think there's the most interesting geology that people shouldn't just be driving by and not thinking about?
Yeah. One of the chapters is about Western Colorado. And there's a highway called the $1 Million Highway that runs up essentially the east slope of, the Rockies in Colorado are actually two ranges. There's a range on the western side of the state and a range in the middle of the state, and then a big plateau kind of in the middle. My book chapter is about the Continental Divide stretch of the mountains, which is mostly in the west. And I think it's sort of stunning because this one highway has 3 or 4 12 to 13,000 foot passes that you drive on. And I really like that. I call it broad-shouldered mountains. The Cascades are kind of narrow and dense, but you get to those Colorado mountains and, they don't look like the Tetons, for example, but these are big mountains, and I like that, and I like I think there's half a dozen or maybe more 13,000 footers in Colorado. That's big mountains.
Is that a scenic byway you think more people should drive?
Yeah.
Is it like Ouray to Silverton, or?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yep. Starts down in Durango and it runs north all the way up to Crested Butte, essentially, if you follow you can choose to follow the road that way.
We drove it once years ago, and I was the one driving, so I couldn't really rubberneck and look too much, right? Because I had to stay on the road. I need a different driver so I can look around. Let's pivot here. Man, we're, as always, we run out of time fast, and I think we will. So we have these mountains, which are stories of uplift, and their shape dependent on how old they are, how they're being eroded, and so forth. But the Colorado Plateau, which you've already described a little bit, and it's interesting you said it's a stable geology, because it is. That these sedimentary layers, which are deposited, turned into rock, and they're not going anywhere, mostly. Although there is like the great unconformity, I think it's called,
Yes.
where there's some
Yeah.
layers where there's like a billion years missing. There's a couple of places here along the Wasatch Front where apparently it's visible. You can, like, the rock and the very next layer is like it's a billion years off or something. But the interesting thing is, with this stable geology, the reason people, I think, travel and come is to see what they would probably view as very unstable, being the canyon countries created by the erosion of this tall plateau. What are some of your favorite places? I mean, the Grand Canyon, you can walk through however many gazillions of years of geology layer by layer. But in the car, where are the places that you think people can best see this, billions of years of history of sedimentary layers that have now been cut through by rivers and water?
I would pick Zion National Park, and the valley that is there. And here's why: it's compact, so you can see all of this geological story much easier than you can in the Grand Canyon, where you're overwhelmed. Zion encloses the story. The Grand Canyon overawes. And I mean, I love the Grand Canyon, but Zion's my favorite. And the detective story that is all of these layers is so clear there. The fact that it was once a great desert that created the, dominant sandstone that's in the canyon, but the dust that formed that sandstone came from Appalachian mountains that were at the time as high as the Himalayas. It's there. It's in the rock. And that's just one of the stories that's in the rock. So I think that's a good place. I'm also extremely fond of Lee's Ferry, which is where the Grand Canyon doesn't quite begin at Lee's Ferry. It's called Marble Canyon there, but it's along the Colorado River. And I feel like the drama of the geology is also understandable there. It's closer than standing at 8,000 feet on the north rim of the Grand Canyon.
And looking down. I mean, there's a real difference between looking down into one of these, even being at Zion and going up to the top of one of the canyon walls and looking down. The experience of being down in it and looking up, especially Zion, which it's narrow compared to especially the Grand Canyon, or Bryce, where there's all these layers that are visible, but you're not like closed in by it. But in Zion, you look up and it's just everywhere.
Kodachrome Basin's another great place. That also in farther east, there's a national park there whose name is escaping me right at the moment, but it's
what else do we have? Capitol Reef.
Capitol Reef is the one. And so all of that stretch of geology that runs from the Colorado River up north in that part of Utah you can see the stories there. It actually, it's almost like you're on a different planet. I mean, that's part of it's so dramatically different than everywhere else.
That's the appeal. That's the draw, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's really very few places you can drive around in that corner of Utah where you're not being, smacked in the face with geologic history. It's all around. What about you had a little bit about the 89, which cuts through this country, the 89A through the Vermilion Cliffs, and the Carmel Byway. Talk to us about the Carmel Byway, because that's one that I don't know if people are as familiar with.
Well, if you want to enter there's there's kind of there's a great name called the Grand Staircase, and this is the rising land as you move north from the Colorado River, and and the way it's eroded, you can see these different layers. The Carmel Byway is how you get, it's the eastern door to Zion Canyon. And I believe it is one of the best drives that you can make, because you go up from the Vermilion Cliffs, which are right next to the Colorado River, and you go up to this grand staircase of geology, and then turn west on the Carmel Byway and into this really cool entrance through a tunnel into Zion Canyon. So it's one of my favorite drives. We made it multiple times.
We're kind of running out of time a little bit. I thought of one other thing, kind of going back to this idea of, doing this in a car, pulling an Airstream or just tent camping, versus doing the hotel model. And that's kind of the experience of waking up in the morning, kind of in the place. I've camped a number of times, like in the San Rafael Swell on the San Rafael River, where, you get up in the morning and you step out, and it's just, and especially if you arrive at night when you couldn't see
Yeah.
all the mountain, all the cliffs surrounding you, then you wake up and it's just overwhelming. How do you kind of process those moments, or record them, or cherish them, or, or think about them that kind of might be motivating you to continue with this mode of travel? There's easier ways to travel around than pulling
Yeah.
a trailer, right?
Yeah.
So is this, or what are the other things that like make it worth it?
Yeah. A great example is the Sonoran Desert. And I love the Sonoran Desert. It is it is a not particularly dry desert, which leads to this spectacular profusion of plant life and animal life. So go down to Tucson, where Saguaro National Park is. There's a campground that is on the west side of Tucson, and you're right in the desert. There's saguaros all around you, and teddy bear cholla cactus, and you can lean into these things fairly easily. But I love this because it's so extraordinarily different than where I live, in the conifer Pacific coast. I don't see how you can have that experience if you're cooped up in a hotel, which is air conditioned. And this is not to say we don't have an air conditioner on our trailer. We do. But the point is, you're right in it. You're right in the place. And I think place is quite important to me. I like the variety of places. I've led my life trying to figure out, always choosing a place first before I move to a particular area. What I'm trying to say here is, you can have other things that drive you through life. Am I going to get promoted fast? For me, it's always been place. I need to be in a place that I want to be in, the Bay Area, the desert. So,
Well, I think that driving around the West is a good way to figure out, what places one might like versus might not. And I'm really grateful. I love living out here, but I'm grateful for the wide open spaces. A lot of these places are getting more crowded. The experience is changing. Going to Zion these days there is no off season, right?
Yo,
It's
right.
always busy. But if you are willing to explore a little bit, 30 minutes away, there's probably some BLM land or Forest Service land in a canyon that's almost just as spectacular, and you have it to yourself.
Or go to Kodachrome Basin instead of Bryce.
Yeah. Sometimes the scale isn't as dramatic, but I would, at least for me, I would trade some of that away to have it be a little less crowded and have a little more intimate experience with the landscape.
Sure. Do Cedar Breaks.
Oh yeah,
It's
another one,
great.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
but this is part of what Susan and I are kind of redirecting our travels so that we are, trying to go to the less populated places. That has really changed. And I know you and I talked about this last week or so. When we started this travel 13 years ago, you could go to Zion, and as long as you didn't go in the summer, if you went in the spring and the fall. The last time I went into Zion, it was so crowded that I remember they have tour buses now. You can't drive around, and that's a good thing. But we pulled up to a museum stop, and I heard the bus driver go, "Oh my God." And it was because there were hundreds of people waiting to get on this bus, and this was like October. So big change.
Yeah. As we wrap up, I want to ask two future-oriented questions. First, what's your next big adventure? What's the next trip? And second, what is going to be next from you as a writer?
The next trip in the West that we're talking about is into New Mexico. We've under-visited New Mexico. We've done the northern part of the state in Taos and Santa Fe, but I want to spend more time there. So we're planning a extended trip into that area. It's kind of last summer I felt that I hadn't been to the Dakotas enough. And so, we deliberately laid out a route that took us to Theodore Roosevelt and National Park and Custer and followed the Missouri River across Montana. I'm trying to organize something like that into New Mexico and maybe West Texas also. In terms of writing, I'm trying to go deeper. One of the problems with Airstream Country, to my mind, is it was a big topic. And so I reread the chapters now and think, well, I didn't go deep enough into that particular area. So what I'm trying to do is write a series of essays which are much more tightly focused, or perhaps focused on a phenomenon. I just wrote one called Four Rivers that was published by Weber States magazine, and it was about 4 different rivers in the West. And I went into that in more detail. So go deeper rather than broader, which Airstream Country is very broad. It's like the big picture.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to write essays that are more focused on a particular place.
Yeah. And I think there's a place for both these kinds of writing. Like the big overview is valuable in all kinds of ways. But yeah, these deep down, more focused dives into specific places will be a great supplement to it to add to the shelf. Well, thank you so much for spending a little bit of your morning with us. Congrats on the book, and I really look forward to see some of the next things that you put out.
Well, thank you, Brennan, and I enjoyed it.
Do let me know next if you're passing through my area of Utah and need a stop for lunch or something.
That's a good idea.
Be great to meet in person.
You always pass through Utah.
Yeah, that's the crossroads, right? Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much, Neil. Take care and safe travels.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you'll subscribe and listen every month. Please leave us a review on whatever app or platform you're listening through, and follow us on Facebook, Blue Sky, or X Twitter. On those platforms, you can get updates, leave comments, and share episodes with your friends, family, and colleagues. Writing Westward is supported by the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University. We are an interdisciplinary research center that supports academic research and the promotion of public understanding of the North American West. We host regular public lectures, which we live stream on our YouTube and Facebook pages, have an annual funding cycle with awards, grants, and fellowship categories that nearly anyone can apply for if they are researching or working on the region from any disciplinary approach or towards any final product. Learn more at Redd Center, that's REDD Center.byu.edu. Our theme music was provided by local Utah composer Micah Dahl Anderson. His website is also linked in the show notes. As the podcast host, producer, sound engineer, publicist, and everything else, you can direct any praise or critique my way. I'm the author and editor of a number of books, articles, and chapters on the North American West, borderlands, Native peoples, genocide studies, religion, and the environment. My recent books include a 2018 volume, Native Foreign, Indigenous Immigrants and Refugees in the North American Borderlands, which won the Best Historical Nonfiction Book Award from the Western Writers of America. A 2019 anthology I co-edited with P. Jane Hafen, Essays on American Indian and Mormon History, which won the Metcalf Best Anthology Book Prize from the John Whitmer Historical Association, and a 2022 collection of essays I edited entitled The North American West in the 21st Century. I also recently launched and will be editing a new series for the University of New Mexico Press entitled The West in Context. Send me a note if you have a manuscript to propose for publication. Here at the Red Center, I'm also the general editor and project manager of a great digital public history project, Intermountain Histories. It's a free mobile app and website, intermountainhistories.org, that curates student-researched and written micro-histories of the region, complete with archival photos, bibliographies, and more. To contact me about the podcast, my own research, or anything else, head to bwrensink.org, email me at bwrensink@byu.edu, or follow me on Blue Sky or X Twitter